Welcome to Key Tech. Please describe this channel if you're interested in today's video. Last month, the U.S. Treasury Secretary threatened China with a cutoff on the supply of aircraft parts and engines, demanding rare earths. Behind the scenes, he also planned to use the repatriation of rare earths to lure Taiwanese chip manufacturers to the U.S. It was a beautiful dream, but unfortunately, the actions of major U.S. manufacturers quickly dashed it. But there's more to it than that. A few days after the threat, China also issued a document. While the U.S. manufacturer's gamble was a success, the U.S. Treasury Secretary's dream may be shattered. In late September, the U.S. Treasury Secretary continued to exaggerate the risks of U.S. chip dependence on Taiwan in the media, ordering overseas companies to build chip factories in the U.S. It's worth noting that these companies will receive no subsidies or preferential treatment when building factories in the U.S., and must achieve a 1-to-1 ratio of manufacturing to imports. They do this because U.S. chip foundries lack the necessary capacity. Consequently, companies like Nvidia, Apple, and Microsoft have been forced to source chips from TSMC. Just as chip manufacturers like TSMC and Samsung were yet to make further statements, a major American chip manufacturer made an unexpected move. On the same day, senior executives from GlobalFoundries, the leading American chip foundry, attended the 2025 Technology Summit in Shanghai. At the meeting, its chief business officer explicitly stated that they would collaborate with a domestic Chinese wafer fab this year. GlobalFoundries will license its technology, while the latter will handle foundry production. Together, they will enable American technology chips to be manufactured and delivered in China. In short, the goal is to make American chips sinicized. GlobalFoundries' goal is simple: to capitalize on U.S. chip technology restrictions. Or perhaps, they want to be wary of China's swift countermeasures against U.S. technology restrictions in the future, so as not to lose further market share in China. As the world's fifth-largest chip foundry and the U.S.'s largest, their competitive strength is lower than that of TSMC, Samsung, and SMIC. However, their demand in the Chinese market is growing. According to relevant data, despite the cyclical growth and slowdown in demand for new energy vehicles in China, GlobalFoundries' annual revenue still reached $6.75 billion. Of which automotive electronics accounted for 25%. A large portion of this 25% of revenue came from the Chinese market. Thus, GlobalFoundries quickly made the right decision for its business development, increasing investment in China and leveraging its technology to gain a larger market share. In reality, this was a significant gamble for GlobalFoundries. As China's efforts to manufacture its own chips are progressing rapidly, Chinese customers are beginning to adopt American technology to avoid bottlenecks. Meanwhile, the United States is also calling for the reshoring of chip manufacturing, using various means to strengthen its chip capabilities. Ostensibly, this is to reduce dependence on Taiwanese chips, but in reality, it is intended to gain a greater advantage in future chip supply, thereby continuing its hegemony. To some extent, GlobalFoundries' move may not be very competitive in the Chinese market and is likely to provoke dissatisfaction from the United States. But they were fortunate, as China soon announced a document whose contents would reassure GlobalFoundries. On September 30th, the General Office of the State Council of China issued a document stating that, starting January 1, 2026, relevant departments would use domestic product standards when purchasing products. This domestic product standard refers to components manufactured within China, with a percentage of the total cost being relevant. In simple terms, a certain "made in China" percentage must be achieved before procurement can take place. While the document didn't explicitly mention the specific products, it signaled the Made in China initiative, which would attract more overseas companies to manufacture in China. Some believe that the issuance of this document is a response to U.S. efforts to revive various manufacturing sectors, including the chip and shipbuilding industries. This possibility cannot be ruled out. Since the U.S. dream of reviving its economy began, its primary goal was to suppress China, thereby giving its domestic industries a breathing space. Under these circumstances, many Chinese industries are in a passive position. For example, China faces difficulties obtaining American chips, and may even face further sanctions in the future, when their advantages become even more pronounced. In fact, the sanctions aren't a serious matter. Take the chip market, for example. The US is simply shooting itself in the foot. Once the chip restrictions were imposed, US companies' revenue in the Chinese market plummeted, impacting their R&D funding for new technologies. Meanwhile, Chinese chip development continues to thrive. NVIDIA boasts that its technology is not far behind American chips, and could surpass them in time. What's truly important is that the US is very concerned. I guess everyone still remembers the backdoor issue with NVIDIA chips. They still haven't released a specific regulation, so it's unclear whether there are any backdoors, but the risk is certain. This is the risk of using American technology, and at this point, China has no choice but to act according to Chinese standards. After all, the documents issued by China clearly state that compliance with Chinese standards is essential. The implication is that only when Chinese manufacturing complies with regulations will relevant authorities actively purchase such products. Failure to do so will not only prevent them from receiving orders, but they may also face investigations from relevant Chinese authorities. In short, this sends a positive signal to overseas companies. They are all welcome to participate in Chinese production and delivery. This not only helps them circumvent technological restrictions but also opens the door to the Chinese market. It's truly commendable that China has shown such a broad perspective despite numerous restrictions. We also hope that more companies will share GlobalFoundries' clear-headed approach and seize the vast Chinese market through all means possible.